Um, a little while ago, Condusiv Technologies released a sort of corporate overview video. And I thought it might be helpful as an engineer to go through this video and maybe pause it at certain points and try to explain what is being said in the video in a little more detail. So I've set this up today. Hopefully it'll be interesting and useful. So without further ado, let's start the video and have a listen and see what it says.
As much as virtualization has helped server efficiency, the downside is it adds complexity to the data path, otherwise known as the I/O blender effect that mixes and randomizes I/O streams. If that performance penalty wasn't bad enough, Windows doesn't play well in a virtual environment, or any environment where it's abstracted from the physical layer. So you end up with a surplus of excessively small, tiny writes and reads.
Okay, that's an interesting point. What it's saying is that where you have Windows in your environment, and it doesn't have to be a virtual environment. The same is true on physical Windows servers, workstations, laptops. Because of the way that Windows interfaces with the storage, it can often be quite inefficient. Now, to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that, let's take a look at a couple of slides here. So as an example, we've got a physical host hypervisor sitting here in the middle. So this could be a VMware ESXi server or a Hyper-V server. And this physical hypervisor is hosting a number of virtual machines which are running Windows. And they're all generating storage I/O traffic that gets funneled down through that physical host and then onto the storage at the back end. So here's all our storage I/O packets moving up and down the stack. You'll notice that the I/O packets are quite small. And what's happening here is that when Windows is writing, it often can't find a large enough free space on the NTFS volume to write that data into. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. It just means that Windows isn't very efficient at finding them and writing the data in. So what happens is you get an excess of split I/O situations. So what's happening is the Windows write driver is being given a right to perform. It goes to something in the operating system called the Windows Free Space Cache and says, hey, Free Space Cache, I've got a write to do. Where's my next available free space extent? It gets given that address, it starts writing and then finds, oh, wait, there isn't actually enough room to complete this write. So I'm going to split the I/O. I'll send the data I have been able to write so far on down to the storage in an I/O packet. I'll go back to the Windows Free Space Cache, find my next available free space, and I'll start writing there. And again, it'll find, oh, there's still not enough room, so I'm going to split the I/O again, go back to the Windows Free Space Cache again, and repeat and repeat and repeat until it's been able to complete that write that it was given to perform. Now, each I/O packet that you have to generate takes a measurable amount of time and resource to process. So the more you have to split a write up, the far less efficient it becomes. In the real world, an average gigabyte of storage I/O traffic that perhaps should take maybe 2,000 I/Os to complete could be taking 30,000 or 40,000 or even more to complete. That's very, very inefficient. And what it means is, as it's being funneled through that hypervisor, those small fractured I/O packets now become very randomized because they're coming from different virtual machines. So by the time they hit the storage controller, by the time they hit the storage area network or SAN down here at the bottom, it's arriving in really a chaotic mess of small, fractured, and now very randomized I/O streams. The storage controller doesn't understand the relationship between the packets it's receiving. So as far as it's concerned, it's only receiving data in very small chunks at a time, really giving it the opportunity to only be able to create very small stripes across its media. Very inefficient because it requires a lot more storage level operations to save that same gigabyte of storage traffic and retrieve it again if it needs to read it back in later on, because it's scattered all over the place in the various different stripes on the media. It's a bit like saying, okay, on this side of the room I have a litre of water, which is my data, and I need to move it to that side of the room, which is where the storage is. It's obviously a lot more efficient to make one trip across the room with a litre-sized jug than it is to take that same amount of water, pour it into lots of tiny shot glasses, and then take the first 2 shot glasses across the room, and then come back and take the next 2 shot glasses across the room, and then come back and take the next 2 shot. You see how these small shot glass sized IOs make this whole environment work so much harder than it should to process that same amount of data. So when you have small fractured split IOs like this, it causes a performance penalty. We call it the Windows I/O tax, as in a tax on your performance because of this inefficiency in Windows. The I/O blender effect that the video mentioned is this randomization of the small fractured packets as they pass through the hypervisor. So this is not a great situation, and unfortunately, in most situations, the longer you use your Windows OSs for, the more those NTFS file systems that are mounted within each Windows instance, the more they mature, the more that free space will become fractured into smaller and smaller free space extents, causing more and more split I/O situations over time, unless you take some maintenance actions, or unless you use a software like Condusiv's V-locity software for virtual environments, or Diskkeeper for physical environments. Now, what you want to have is a situation that you would typically see on day one when you install a sort of fresh Windows OS, which looks more like this. So you have the same amount of data moving between server and storage, but it's being transferred in far fewer I/O packets, each one carrying a larger payload of data. That's a far more efficient way of moving that data between server and storage and back again if it needs to be read. And it means that when it's arriving down here at the storage, because it's arriving in nice large chunks at a time, it gives that storage controller the opportunity to create much larger, more sequential stripes across its media. It's generally a lot more efficient. And by the way, there's a reason why most storage hardware manufacturers like to provide specification sheet data for their storage using sequential I/O traffic, sequential reads and writes, rather than much smaller, far more randomized read and writes, because basically that's the type of I/O traffic that storage works best with. It just is. It means far fewer storage operations are required before that read or write can be acknowledged, and that acknowledgement sent back up the stack to the Windows OS that generated it. Anyway, I hope that explains it. I've probably explained it a bit too much, so apologies if I've overdone that. Let's go back to the video and watch the next part there.
That means your application performance hasn't been penalized once, but twice with I/O characteristics that are much smaller, more fractured, and more random than they need to be. This death by 1,000 cuts scenario means systems process workloads about 50% slower than they should on the typical Windows server, because far more I/O is needed to process any given workload. Most IT professionals think the only way to solve performance problems is to throw expensive hardware at the problem, new servers or new storage, when in fact, all someone has to do is simply try Condusiv I/O reduction software on any Windows server.
Now that's an interesting point. Most IT professionals think that to solve storage performance problems, they need to throw more hardware at the problem. And historically, I've been guilty of this myself. I haven't always worked at Condusiv. I did work in other places as well. And before I came across the Condusiv technology, the Condusiv software, my go-to solution for storage performance problems were, let's beef up the SAN. Let's put more SAS drives. It was a while ago. It was a few years ago. Let's put more spindles into the SAN to spread the load of the I/O over a greater number of spindles to give it better performance. Other people think, okay, let's introduce a tray of flash or SSD and use that as our very fast tier 1 in the SAN. And then we'll use the much slower spinning SAS drives as a tier 2, which is slower, but it has a larger capacity. Spread workloads over a greater number of servers. Yeah, you can do that if you can run the workloads in a clustered environment. Things like SQL Server, for example, work very well in that type of situation. But really what you're doing is overbuying hardware, over provisioning for this excess unnecessary storage workload that frankly doesn't need to happen. If you put the V-locity or Diskkeeper software into the Windows OS, just install it like you would any other piece of software, it will eliminate this issue of inefficient storage I/O from happening and significantly reduce the I/O workload that the back-end storage has to deal with. So think for a moment, should your first go-to solution be to spend lots of money on hardware, or should it be to try and tune the workloads that you're running and utilize the hardware that you've already purchased, that you already own? Get more out of it. Give it the capacity to cope with a much greater amount of workload. If you've got a storage hungry application that's really only running as fast as the storage can allow it to, well, if you remove these inefficiencies, you're also allowing that application to be able to get more work done in the same amount of time using the hardware that you already own. That's got to be good. It also might mean that you can keep that same hardware running for a longer period of time. Now, I'm not saying that you will never ever have to buy more hardware, but you might not have to do that technology refresh quite as soon as you first thought. And when you do need to refresh the hardware, well, clearly you're not going to have to overbuy and over-provision quite so much because the I/O workload has been significantly reduced and made more efficient. So maybe your next SAN purchase, for example, doesn't have to be quite as expensive as you feared because you're already making that I/O traffic right at the point where it's being generated inside the Windows operating system. Right, let's see what it says next on the video.
Virtual or physical, that guarantees to solve your toughest performance challenges.
Guarantees? Guarantees to solve your performance challenges? Well, actually, yes. The Condusiv software does come with a money-back guarantee. If you've got storage performance issues and you put our software in and we don't solve those storage performance issues or make them better, quite simply, Condusiv will refund you your money. It's as simple as that. It is an ironclad guarantee that is offered by Condusiv. As far as I'm aware, nobody's actually taken us up on that because obviously the software does what it should do. It does what it says on the tin, and I hate that expression. But the guarantee is there, and hopefully from that as a takeaway, you'll understand that not many software companies provide that type of guarantee, but hopefully it's an indication of just how confident we are that this technology works. I mean, Condusiv as a company, I think, was formed in 1981, long before Windows came on the scene. So we've been working with this type of technology for a long time. We wouldn't still be in existence if it didn't work. Now, back in the 80s and 90s, we were focused very much on the Open VMS operating system. Probably most of you aren't old enough to remember the old VAX VMS systems and Alpha VMS, but that's where we came from. And Windows was based, in fact, sorry, Windows NT that was brought out back in the mid-90s was based very much on Open VMS from DEC or Digital back in the day, and shared a lot of the architecture characteristics. So it was quite easy for us to move and make a shift from Open VMS to Windows and still stay very, very relevant. And even so today. Anyway, let's get back to the video and see what it says next.
ensuring you never have to upgrade your storage backend for performance reasons. Condusiv's patented I/O reduction software eliminates small, tiny writes by displacing them with large, clean, contiguous writes, so more payload is delivered with every I/O operation. In addition, Condusiv's I/O reduction software further reduces I/O to storage by establishing a Tier 0 caching strategy by automatically serving hot reads from memory that is idle.
Now, I've not mentioned that yet. We were talking about the I/O reduction by eliminating the inefficiencies in Windows in splitting up data as it's writing it out, and the inefficiencies that's caused when you read that back in. But in the Diskkeeper and V-locity softwares, there is also RAM caching technology that's super efficient. What this does basically is allows a good percentage of the read I/O traffic to be satisfied at the speed of RAM, rather than all of those read requests having to go out and be satisfied at the speed of the media and the storage. Now, I'm sure most of you will understand that RAM is hugely faster than spinning disk technology like SAS drives and the like. But flash and SSD, if you've got SSD drives, RAM is still roughly 10 times faster than SSD. So if you've got a reasonable amount of read I/O traffic going on, and most Windows machines do, if you can satisfy a good percentage of that traffic at the speed of RAM, that's got to be good for performance.
Otherwise unused. This means the typical Condusiv customer experiences at least 50% faster application performance, while many see twice as much or more, depending on the amount of available DRAM. Whatever bottleneck or I/O ceiling that is causing slowness, Condusiv I/O reduction software guarantees to solve it, so your applications run smoothly, like it did for thousands of companies like these.
Now, the text that's on the video here are talking about case studies that we've done. And in fact, I've got a little slide about that as well here. We have a lot of case studies from happy customers that most of them have been using the software for years. You can access them all at condusiv.com and have a read through them. There's some great examples on here. This one here, Bell Mobility. They're a telecoms company in Canada. They're like the Canadian AT&T, I understand, or the Canadian version of British Telecom. They put the V-locity software into their environment, and it reduced the I/O traffic going out to their SAN by 61%. I mean, that's huge. 61% less storage workload having to be processed by the storage. The result was their SQL report queries were 3 times faster. No additional hardware required. All they had to do was install the software, which, by the way, takes a couple of minutes to download and install. You don't have to reboot anything. There's no disruption to live running workloads, whether you are installing the software or uninstalling the software if you decide it's not for you. Just simply install it and see. I mean, as an engineer, I like to try and approach these things as scientifically as I can. So I would say, I don't want you really to take my word for any of this. The best thing for you to do is simply try it for yourself and see what difference it can make, because everybody's environment is different. Everyone's got a different hardware setup, everyone's running different applications, everyone's running different workloads within those applications. It's very, very rare to find two setups that are the same. Some people are going to get more value from this software than others, but for everybody, it will remove those inefficiencies in Windows. And the more you're using your storage, the more you're likely to see good performance gains and value from the software. There's another one up here, Christus Health, quite a large healthcare organization out in the United States. These guys were about to pull the trigger on a $2 million purchase order from a very well-known storage hardware manufacturer. I probably shouldn't name them, but they rhyme with Cletflap. Anyway, they were about to rip and replace their SAN. $2 million storage upgrade. That's a lot of money. Even if you've got a large budget, that's quite a significant chunk of money to spend out on storage. The reason for doing this was that they had virtualized their medical records application. So they'd done the standard P to V or physical to virtual, and they were running all of these workloads now in VMware, and they were really suffering from the performance loss that was being caused by the split I/O traffic and that I/O blender effect that randomizes that split I/O traffic. So they were in a position where they're about to pull the trigger on this $2 million purchase order, but they tried our V-locity software first. Not only were they able to get back all of the performance they needed just by using the software, they actually cancelled the purchase order. They didn't place it. Now, of course, the storage manufacturer was a little upset, to say the least. But the good news for them is that they actually are going to place that order at some point, but they've been able to defer that capital investment for a number of years because they've got extra life now out of the storage hardware that they already own, which is great for everybody, really. So all of these are case studies. There are many more on the website, as I say, at condusiv.com. Might be worth taking a look, have a look and see if there's a similar company in a similar vertical or similar workspace to you. We've got people who are marketing, processing large art files. Similarly, it's very useful for things like AutoCAD, Photoshop. If you're doing video processing, if you're running databases like SQL, Oracle, even some of the more obscure ones like MariaDB or some of the other databases. If they're running in Windows, they will likely be generating a lot of storage traffic, and that's really where we can help. I'm not going to say it's a silver bullet for all types of workloads, because it's not. If you've got something like a DHCP server that's really not generating a great deal of storage I/O traffic, well, honestly, this software is not going to set the world alight there. But where you have applications and workloads that are generating a lot of storage traffic, so things like SharePoint, busy file servers, database servers, document management systems, medical records applications, CRMs, Microsoft Dynamics, ERP systems, that's typically where you're going to see the most bang for buck. And most organizations are using at least some of those types of workloads. Give it a try. You really have nothing to lose and everything to gain, other than the 2 minutes it takes you to download and install the software and get it deployed. Worth a try. Right, let's see what else we've got on the video. Nearly at the end now. You'll probably be pleased to hear. Hopefully this has been interesting and I haven't been waffling too much.
Condusiv I/O reduction software guarantees to solve performance issues on Windows servers. Download a 30-day trial. www.condusiv.com/try.
Oh, let's bring that URL back up again. There we go. So, if this sounds interesting and you want to maybe avoid an expensive hardware upgrade, or you just want to get more performance out of the workloads that you're running, maybe you've got some users that are complaining about performance, or heaven forbid customers, give the software a try. You can get it, as it says there, at condusiv.com/try. There's a very short registration form. You get your download link within a minute or so of submitting that. Try it. If you want to have help from an engineer like myself, or one of the other chaps, you're very, very, very welcome. We can help you install the software. We can help you run reports to show exactly what benefit the software is able to provide for you in your real world environment with your real world workloads. A little tip as an engineer. Yes, you can download the software and install it onto specific servers, but and that's great for making sure the software works as advertised and getting used to the interface, although frankly it's really very easy to use. But the point I wanted to make is, if you really want to see the full power of the software, get it installed onto as many Windows machines as you can that share the same back-end storage. So if you've got a VMware environment, for example, install it onto all of the VMs. The reason for that is going to be the biggest reduction in storage workload that the back-end storage has to deal with. Let's say, for example, you've got 100 virtual machines and you install the software onto just 10 of those machines. Yes, it will reduce the workload coming out of those 10 machines, and they will benefit from the performance boost that the RAM caching provides. But as far as the storage is concerned, it's still dealing with those 90 other servers generating all of those excess, unnecessary, tiny, random reads and writes. But if you put the software onto all 100 machines, now the back-end storage is simply doing the least amount of work. And typically, in my experience from working with a lot of customers, I would say you should expect a storage I/O reduction of somewhere between 30 to 50%. It's not usually less than 30%. It's normally within that range. And sometimes on some servers, it can be as much as 60, 70%. It's quite significant. But if you really want to see the true power of the software, put it onto as many Windows machines as you can. And if you've got a larger estate, let's say you've got 100 virtual machines, you don't have to install separately on each machine. We can provide you with a management console that from a single pane of glass will deploy the software across the network without having to reboot anything. And you're up and running with the software on all of those machines in a matter of minutes. And again, we're very happy to jump on a call with you and walk you through it. We could have a remote session using Skype or WebEx or GoToMeeting, whichever is preferable. And we can either do it with you or do it while you watch, whichever you prefer. So we want it to be as simple and easy and quick to set up as we can possibly make it for you. We will help you as much or as little as you want. You just let us know and we'll be on hand to help you as you feel appropriate. So I hope that's useful. Please feel free to reach out. Contact details are, of course, on our website at condusiv.com/try. If you want to reach out to me personally, my name is Spencer Allingham. I'm the Regional Vice President for Condusiv in the Europe, Middle East and Africa region. As you've probably gathered, I'm not really a sales guy. I'm more of a technical engineer. I got upgraded or promoted fairly recently. Before that, for the last 7 years, I was actually the technical director. So fairly well placed to help you run the trialware or a proof of concept as much or as little as you want. My email address is sallingham. In fact, it might be helpful if I put that up on the screen as well. Let's do that. So, sallingham@condusiv.co.uk. Let's make that a bit bigger. Oops, a bit too big. There. That will send your email directly to me. As I say, very happy to help out as much or as little as you want. But please try the software. Try it and see. You might well be very pleasantly surprised and could possibly save a ton of money on your next hardware purchase. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, look forward to hearing from you soon. Take care.